Been very, very good to have Jonathan here on a placement through the term. Jonathan's been on a placement, a chaplaincy placement for a course that he's currently doing, and invited Jonathan to come and just share our reading with us this morning. Thank you, Jonathan.
It's from Psalms 130. Out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, so that we can, with reverence, serve you. I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. I wait for the Lord, more than watchmen wait for the morning. More than watchmen wait for the morning. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, for with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. So even if generally by this stage of December, most people have started Christmas, as I see the Christmas jumpers around, today here, we're still in Advent. We're still in Advent. Because the themes of Advent are so rich and powerful, it's wrong just to race through and have a bit of a moment of Advent at the beginning of December and then start singing Silent Night, Jingle Bells from the 2nd of December. It just doesn't seem right to me. Perhaps I'm a bit of a purist. And so I'm going to reflect together, we're going to think about this theme of waiting, which is such an important theme for all of the whole year round, but it's a theme that particularly the readings and the prayers of Advent pick up on. Now, waiting is not usually a popular activity. It's not something we think about with a great deal of affection, if we're honest. In fact, we're prone to see it as a bit of a waste of time or even an annoyance. And what's all this business about the British being good at queuing? I'm not quite so sure about that myself. I do it because that's the that's the norm. But do I like doing it? Probably not, if I'm honest. And why am I agitated when I'm in a bit of a rush, going through the supermarket checkout? Because I refuse to go to the self-checkouts, but that's another story. Why am I agitated when someone's on a real go slow in front of me? And however, it might be lovely for those people to have a nice conversation at the checkout. Why am I agitated when I've got a million things to do? Why am I agitated when I'm needing to download something and it seems to take forever? A watch pot never boils, they say. And it's true, isn't it? A watch pot never boils. So maybe it's best to do something else while your pot is boiling. Use that waiting time to do something. Or is that just running away? Should I actually be spending much more time watching the pot? We live in a fast-moving culture and ever faster by the day. Faster internet speeds connecting us faster and faster and faster to everything and everyone. The mantra of the age is don't just sit there and wait, get on and do something, and do it now. So waiting can feel a bit like wasted time, empty time, certainly feels unfulfilling and unproductive. An odd place, sometimes a bit of an uncomfortable place to be, somewhere between where we are and where we want to be, an in-between place. And I know that when it comes to prayer, We are encouraged to take the long view of praying and intercession. We know that between our asking and God responding may come a very long period of time in which apparently we're meant to grow and get wiser so that we're ready to better receive God's answer to that prayer. I know that in my head. Not so easy though all the time, is it? So some of you may know that we're trying to sell our house in West Sussex, and so we're living in two different places at once at the moment. Well, I am. I'm living here part of my week. My wife and the tortoise and the dog are living in West Sussex. And at the moment it's not happening, even though so many people are very kindly praying. So there has to be, I trust, a good reason why it's not happening. But it doesn't always feel that way. The opening gospel verses describe the good news of Jesus, his coming and his birth. And these chapters are filled with people who in one way or another are waiting. But they're not waiting aimlessly. There's something clearly that they're waiting for, even if they don't quite know exactly what it is. There's a context for their waiting. Something good is going to be happening. And these people in their own way were representatives of a whole history of God's people who waited, who felt faithful to the call of God. So remember Abraham and Sarah, who waited years for their promised son to be born. Moses, years before the people could leave Egypt, and then loads more years when they just wandered around waiting to get to their land. The prophets were people who in their waiting heard God speak. The days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will fulfill the promise I made. Those are words that Jeremiah heard. I will do this. I will fulfill it. But then it didn't come in the way that people thought it would, the way people expected that it would, and certainly not in the lifetime of the first people who heard those words from the lips of Jeremiah or Isaiah or the other prophets that spoke these words of promise. We heard in that reading just now from the psalmist, my soul waits for the Lord. My whole being waits. More than the night watch looks and waits for the morning. And that refrain, wait for the Lord, is echoed time and time again in the Hebrew scriptures. So the waiting of these early gospel characters had a context. What was the waiting, I wonder, that they were experiencing? What was that all about? Maybe a big part of their waiting was that something had already begun within them that helped them to keep their eye on the ball. A promise that they just got a bit of a whiff of, a bit of a scent of something, a sense of something. And so they knew they needed to continue to pay attention to it. Dutch Roman Catholic priest and writer Henri Nouwen spoke a lot about waiting, and he said this: we can only really wait if what we are waiting for has already begun in us. So waiting is never a movement from nothing to something. It is always a movement from something to something more. It is never a movement from nothing to something, but always a movement from something to something more. But waiting can often feel a very passive thing, a very non-eventful thing, sometimes properly dull and boring. But the waiting that we witness in these early gospel characters seem to be, rather than passive waiting, active waiting. Something is happening in the waiting. However hard at times that must have been, it wasn't just a means to an end. There's something fruitful happening. This is fertile ground, all of this waiting. So consider Mary. Consider Mary. Waiting, yes, within herself, in her soul, in her heart, but also physically waiting in her body. Waiting for the angel Gabriel's words to come true and to become a complete reality for her. Some days it must have all felt so unreal. What was happening within her body? Helped by people around her, Joseph, her cousins, Mary, Elizabeth and Zechariah, but a lot of that waiting just on her own, wondering, who could possibly understand what was going on for Mary? But there was a promise, and so she waited. Consider Joseph, a carpenter, someone used to mending things and making things and sorting things, seeing what was needed doing and doing it. Now he's not in control. He's not in control, and that must have felt a very unsafe place to be. Unsure of the future, keen perhaps to be this dad, but like this? But there was a promise, and so he waited. Consider Elizabeth. A miracle if ever there was one. Well on in years, becoming pregnant. This beautiful moment when Elizabeth and Mary meet one another, this somersault of joy within Elizabeth's womb. A promise that this child, John, would lead people back to God. But how on earth that would happen was anyone's guess. But there was a promise. And so she waited. And consider one of the wise men, maybe. Let's call him Caspar, for argument's sake. The strangest of journeys, moments of real clarity, a star moving, you know you've got to follow it. And yet the uncertainty of what that journey was all about, all rolled into one, an urge to keep following, and to turn back now would be cowardly. But how long is this journey going on for? And what are we going to see when we get there? We often say, don't we, that at night time all of our doubts and fears all come flooding in. But bizarrely, maybe for Caspar or any of these wise men from the east, maybe the night times was the easy bit, because they could see where they were going. It was in the daytime, perhaps, when the ghosts of doubt and fear all came flooding in, because there was no star to look at. But there was a promise in the stars. And so he and they waited. And then finally consider Simeon. a calling to serve in the temple, fulfilling his vows, saying his prayers, part of a waiting people, a faithful servant. And maybe for him a sense of something coming closer, a flame, a light, supported no doubt by Anna and by the others who came in those dark days to say their prayers and light their candles. But there was a promise, and so he waited. I think it's naive to imagine that these biblical characters were always serene in their waiting. They were bound to have had days where it all just felt so unbearably long. At least that's how I imagine them. But to journey with the waiting that they did would have required a real digging deep kind of patience, sitting tight, resisting the urge just to say blow it and to give up. It's not happening. And so today I wonder if the experience of these characters can help us in our waiting. We all wait. In our personal lives, we wait for things to happen, for clarity to arrive. And in the bigger picture in our world, the world waits. St. Paul speaks of the whole creation groaning as in the pain of childbirth. If it was groaning when he wrote that 2,000 years ago, how much more is it groaning today? We continue to wait as people of faith for the renewal of all things, for total justice and peace. What can make some waiting easier is when there's a definite time limit attached to our waiting. So I wait for this to happen, I'm waiting for such and such. I know it's going to happen and it's going to happen at this time. That's sort of easy waiting. But waiting that is more ambiguous and open-ended is bound to be harder. But mature faith is trusting that something will be fulfilled according to God's will, not necessarily, though, according to our wishes or our timescales. And it's natural that we will project onto our waiting our expectations, our ideas of what we're waiting for and what it should be, and when it should be. But I think when we can let go of some of these projections and expectations, that I believe is when we can be truly open to allow God to do things his way. And I think this is the sort of fruit that we then see in these biblical characters. Mary and Joseph, they didn't really know what this was all going to be about. Elizabeth and Zechariah, similarly. The wise men, they were on this journey to something, they didn't know what. Simeon and Anna with this ministry of prayer and waiting. But the surprise at the end of all this waiting was far beyond anything that any of these people could ever have imagined. So we're not in control of this process of waiting, even though if you're a bit of a control freak like me, you may try to manipulate it just a little bit. But we are not in control of the end result. The spiritual life that we are called to is journeying in faith with the Lord, where we actively wait, open to new things beyond what we can possibly imagine, know, or control, coming to us. So what I invite you to do today, maybe, or over these remaining days of Advent, is to maybe just consider one of these characters that I've just invited us to consider, or you might have thought of someone else as we've been reflecting together. What does their experience of waiting say to you? How does it speak to you in your own waiting? And I'd like to invite you today or over the coming days to spend some time in their company. Have a cup of tea with them. Go for an imaginary walk with them. Or write a letter to them. And what things might form part of your imaginary conversation with Mary or with Joseph or with a wise man or whoever? What are your questions? And what help with your own waiting does this person of faith offer to you?